Well, good afternoon. I'm Kevin Walker, Senior Vice President of Public Policy for the Overland Park Chamber. This interview is being conducted on behalf of the Johnson County Public Policy Council, comprised of the Chambers of Commerce in Johnson County and the Greater Kansas City Chamber. Jointly, we host a site, votejoco.com, which is a nonpartisan site where voters can learn more about candidates for public office. This afternoon, we have with us Brian Matlock, who's a Republican candidate for the United States Senate. Brian, thanks for joining us today. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running for office?
Yeah, absolutely. I live here in Kansas City, Kansas with my wife, and down the street, my 24-year-old daughter lives. We adopted her when she was 16. I've been teaching economics and researching at UMKC for the last several years, and kind of decided to get into this. Basically, we have these large-scale structural problems in our economy. For the last 40 years, we've had increasing healthcare, housing, and education costs, but wages have been stagnant. And those can't keep going in different directions forever. And so we're already seeing more people can't afford healthcare, they declare bankruptcy or don't pay their premiums and use the ER. Those costs are redistributed on everybody else, and then it gets worse and worse. Similarly, with student debt, we're going to see that, especially in light of COVID, with just really weighing on the economy and people's ability to spend. And so I didn't feel like anybody was addressing some of the core issues. They more of these kind of standard partisan things, which are have a lot of just kind of symbolic, good team, bad team. But I feel like a lot of the values that I got growing up, my parents were constantly opening their homes to other people, donating, volunteering, helping out their neighbors. And a lot of that, I think there's a huge area of overlap between the younger generation that is more leaning towards identifying as socialists, or at least they don't trust big markets, growing up in the wake of the corporate takeover of a lot of different industries and the global financial crisis. But on the other hand, a lot of the my parents' generation identify as Republican and care about these values of hard work and personal responsibility and things. And so I think there is an area of overlap where we can start building solutions to some of these problems. And so a lot of my policy positions is focused on doing that.
Good, thank you. And why don't we dive into some of those policy positions with a little bit of Q&A here. Brian, tell us what you think the top 3 business policy issues are facing the country right now.
Right now, we're set to expire the CARES Act here at the end of the month. And if we don't renew some sort of stimulus, we're basically going off of economic life support, in my opinion. Just some of the things, as an individual, say landlord, you might, okay, they're not paying, I need to evict them. But if landlords across the board are evicting people, that's going to hurt everybody, both tenants and landlords. And so some of the things we need to do is stabilize the economy so that spending can keep happening, so that people can keep their businesses. And so some of the initial funds for businesses is sort of it's filtered through banks to determine who gets the money, which has overwhelmingly helped franchises and mid-sized businesses, because banks are, their job is to give to credit-worthy borrowers. But the problem is, if you're a small business and you don't have a big set of you don't have a big bank account, then you aren't as creditworthy. And so what we've seen is a lot of small businesses are having trouble making it, aren't accessing as much as the funds. And we need to make sure that this crisis doesn't just let big corporations gobble up all of the local economy again and disempower communities, because what they keep doing is playing against, hey, give me a $5 million tax abatement, or I'll go to this community who will. And that's not a strong place to be. So we need to support individual individual spending by renewing both the unemployment benefits and stimulus, as well as provide a more comprehensive business support so that they aren't, during a good time, if a business goes out, you would hope that a better business will take its place that better meets people's needs and they'll be able to succeed. But during a crisis, what happens is a business goes out and nothing takes its place and we all just sit on our hands. It doesn't need to be that way. And so both providing some of the supports on those levels, as well as one of the policies I'm most passionate about is a federal job guarantee that is locally administered. And so, because when there's a recession or something, it's not that there's not enough work to be done. It's that people made bad bets on Wall Street or something, and now we're all having trouble paying rent, paying off our debt. And so having, what happens is a lot of people, they search for work for a time and then they give up, they leave the labor force permanently, and they lose skills and things. So if you have a job guarantee where local communities can democratically decide, like, what are our priorities? Like, what do we want to be working on in the meantime? So people have somewhere to go to maintain spending so that businesses still have customers, people have jobs and they don't have to spend down all of their wealth and things. But then as the economy picks up, they can get bid back out into the private sector. And so it offers an automatic stabilizing mechanism, and the local control allows people to kind of use their knowledge of their area and what they're passionate about, what they care about, and use federal resources to support those efforts rather than have everything centralized with the decision making.
Good. Thank you for that. Tell me a little bit about your views on federal tax policy.
Yeah, I think, so I'm anti-austerity in general. I think both parties can tend to be like, oh, the deficit. But it's usually just they don't care when it comes to their priorities. They do care when they're stopping their opponents. But really, I think it is a mistake to target the deficit itself. I do not believe, like, the purpose of, because the federal government is the currency issuer. They're not a currency user like us, like state and local governments. When we spend dollar bills, those came from the government, right? They're not our name. And so they spend it into the economy, and that money circulating is money they've not yet taxed back out. What do we call money that's been spent into the economy that hasn't been taxed out? The deficit. And so we need it to grow consistent with the growth of the economy as more goods and services are being produced. But if we're at full employment and max capacity usage, if the government tries to spend money or cut taxes, then we run the risk of inflation. But if we have a lot of excess capacity, then great. So I think we can do a lot to both cut taxes. I do believe that it should be more local business. Like, I'm not a big trickle down person. I think the tax cuts would have been more effective. They were somewhat effective, but they would have been more effective at middle and lower income levels than big corporate buybacks and things like that. So, but I think we can have a generous tax policy and without having to, like, fearmonger about, we need to pay off the debt. Like, paying off the debt means putting a vacuum over the economy and sucking dollars out. Federal debt is a private sector surplus. That's an accounting equation. Like, so yeah, I think people who are either trying to tax real hard or cut real spending can be well-meaning on either end, but generally both are painful for the economy.
Good. Thank you. And Brian, I know you've touched on this a little bit in your opening, but can you talk about what you would propose, if anything, to provide further relief to Kansas businesses impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, especially to encourage recovery and economic growth?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we need to provide a lot more comprehensive, like, uh, so the thing with money, you can't, we have infinite money in terms of the government, but we don't have infinite goods. You can't print restaurants or print workers. And so the thing is, if how we deal with financial commitments is different than how we deal with real source commitments. So if people are owing rent and owing these sorts of things, like it's easy. Okay, boom, done. If we need real goods and resources that people are demanding but they don't exist, that's a whole nother set of policies. So with businesses, I think we need to provide resources to make sure as many as possible survive during this pandemic, so that people, like, again, in a normal time, whether you survive or fail hopefully has to do with the quality of your business. But in these special times of recession and problems, it's sort of not up to a lot of us. And so what we want to do is help them survive and ride it out by providing like really increased payroll protections that are not filtered through the banking system to decide who's creditworthy, but then can fix that on the back end. It's so hard and expensive to screen upfront who gets resources, as opposed to, well, if someone's a billionaire and they happen to get a couple thousand stimulus, then like hopefully the tax system is actually meaningful and we get that back on the back end. So I think we need the, like, it's going to be stabilizing consumer spending, so increasing the stimulus payments and renewing and increasing, in my opinion, the unemployment, extra unemployment benefits, as well as stabilizing the budgets of state and local governments. Because one of the things you don't want in a recession, at the local level, since they can only spend what they tax, what happens is a recession hits and you get a lot less revenue, so you have to cut, but that further cuts a bunch of jobs and spending into the economy, which can send you into a spiral. It's a federal policy you kind of want to counterbalance because they have the ability to stabilize. And so we need to make sure that those drastic cuts don't happen, because the more spending in the economy, the more that helps businesses, but then making sure they aren't just defaulting on loans and losing, not able to pay their rent and things. Like, we can stabilize those financial commitments and then try to keep spending going as much as possible so we can ride through this.
Thank you. I'm going to switch gears on you a little bit and talk about transportation. What are your views on long-term funding solutions for our transportation infrastructure?
Yeah, so again, the limits are, of course, real resources, not financial resources. So it's sort of like, as much as we have available labor and raw materials, we can be putting people to work in a federal jobs guarantee, working on rebuilding the infrastructure. As much as there are trade-offs, I think there's just a lot of unnecessary spending in our economy, particularly with the criminal justice system and the military. And that's partly because certain things like, you know, if you lock somebody up, it's so expensive. And we lock up more people than any society on earth. Like, and so certain things like, oh, he stole $15 and then we spent $30,000 keeping in jail for a certain period of time. It's just like the ways that we can deal with certain things like homelessness, children and youth with antisocial behaviors, and many other issues, is like, we want to pass laws to make stuff illegal and then lock people up, when there are already more effective solutions that cost less, that exist. And we could be saving a bunch of money on those and be having lower rates of crime. And so I think like being able to look at the ways that our system is wasteful. And then another one is, I think private insurance is unnecessary middlemen, and we could do away with that, which would be a huge efficiency gain for the economy. And as we think about freeing up workers, it's like, if we don't have a plan, it can be like, oh no, they're going to be unemployed, it's going to hurt the economy. But if we have a plan, look, there's so much we need to do. Like, let's have the job guarantee, let's prioritize some of our infrastructure development and having more healthcare providers instead of more billing department and insurance. Like, those are the things that we can start to plan for and address in our economy.
Well, thank you for that. And let's talk about international trade. What are your views on international trade and especially tariffs?
Not huge on tariffs. I think it can often be a long-term loss as we have like poorer relationships, because we're always trying to like scrape every last penny out of our trade partners. And that, I think in general, we should be supporting more local production. That's both to help our economy and help the environment. It's not doing any favors to be unnecessarily transporting goods from around the world. I think the situation with China is complex because it's been like decades in the making. We sort of wanted cheap goods. So they were like, okay, no one's going to sell us the raw materials and the manufacturing equipment in yuan. We need dollars or euros to buy that. So we are going to work our people in sweatshops on the cheap and accumulate this cash and start buying and developing and developing. And then suddenly they have like an extremely advanced manufacturing sector, and they don't need to produce as cheaply in some things. And so it's sort of a weird thing we find ourselves in, like, okay, how much we've hurt our manufacturing by just getting theirs, but then also we're getting less good of a deal. So what is the best long-term? I think thinking strategically long-term, China is going to be around. China's economy is going to keep growing. And I'm not saying we need to like, oh, anything you want, China, but like we need to think really strategically, how do we build a good long-term relationship with China where it's fair, we're not getting a steal, but also they're not taking advantage of us. And so I think the trade wars is not the best approach to build that type of long-term relationship we need.
Okay, that's fair. Let's talk about your views on national immigration policy. If you can, describe that a little bit, and then also tell us, do you support employment-based immigration reforms to assist with workforce shortages?
Yeah, I basically think that immigration is beautiful. It's part of the dream of this country and our highest aspirations. A lot of the population growth that has happened in Kansas has been because of immigration, and we would be in really tough economic times if it weren't for that. And so in general, I think we can look at it in a more positive, hopeful, dreaming big, okay, our biggest resources is people who do things. And it's not as much as there's a scarcity mentality of we have limited healthcare, limited goods, it's they can be healthcare providers, job creators, all of these things. And so how do we build policy that allows that best to happen, for people to come and participate, building a really awesome Kansas together? So I think there should be a lot more lax or supportive policy in general, not as and so work-based, sure, we should provide more opportunities for people to work. And there are plenty of people here who I know personally who are contributing, both working hard and working in the community, who aren't documented. And I think we should allow them to like have a path to citizenship, like make it a civil offense so that they can, you know, pay a fee or do some things. But like, I don't think we gain anything by like stopping population growth and stopping workers from being here, or people who are wanting to come and contribute to our economy. And so I think if you like see it as the resource that it is, like what can we build with this? Like what can we build together? It's just a very different set of questions than like the view that, oh, they're invading to take our stuff. That's my opinion. Yeah.
You know, and let's go back to healthcare for a minute. Tell us what you think the federal government's role is in our healthcare system.
Yeah, what I don't like about the Affordable Care Act is it sort of like puts these insurance intermediaries in to dump millions of dollars into, and it doesn't actually provide competition or choice. We have very limited choice about where we can go. It's whatever's in network. And so what I think is we should do away with the private insurance system and have like private healthcare, but that is publicly insured. And so like part of the thing is then, for one, my wife had cancer, and that was the worst. It was before Obamacare, so there were no like out-of-pocket maximums. And so it was 20% copay with no max. So we, after 100,000, she hadn't even been through a fourth of her treatment, and we had 20,000 in debt, and they weren't going to pay anything else. And so like the type of, and then they were constantly like kicking back, like rejecting random claims. And during the worst time in your life, you don't want to be fighting with billing and insurance and all of those things. So knowing that it's covered, that you can go to any of the hospitals, so they have to compete with quality of care rather than competing with who get the best insurance deal. And I think we've just shown we have the most expensive system with the worst outcomes, and until age 65, when we have the best outcomes. What happens at age 65? Everyone's on Medicare. And so I think we have the ability to cut out the middleman, and like $80,000 to $100,000 we spend per provider just doing all of the billing, collections, insurance. So being able to have those efficiency gains just off the top gives us, so we've had over 80 studies done, and almost all of them find you get increased care because more people are going to the doctor instead of waiting at home being sick, but at a lower overall cost. And then we're not tied to businesses, so it's easier to be an entrepreneur or something because you're not like, oh, I have to work at this like corporate job to get insurance or something. It's already covered. It helps, so you don't have to worry about that with your employees. It's one of the largest expenses is covering healthcare. And so just doing something like, yeah, so I think that insurance companies do not actually provide any of the things that markets are supposed to provide, like competition, choice, innovation. Instead, it's like, has these people who control, they have a financial incentive to deny care as much as possible, to make things as complicated and hard to get the things they already owe you. And so few companies do it that it's like, it's just like you have to pay through these financial fiefdoms to get healthcare. And I think there's just, when you see farmers not getting healthcare, who are the backbone of our economy, like hard workers, like we see increasing like infant mortality and mother mortality, like to almost third world levels among poor people, and it's getting worse. Like we shouldn't be having those problems in our country. And it's not just a few people like stealing from the rest of us. It is affecting more and more of our economy, of our workforce. And it's not like, I haven't heard any solution that addresses the scale of the problem other than Medicare for all. Like, I'm willing to listen for sure, but people, I just hear the same things like, oh, transparency, this and that, but nothing actually addresses or has the type of data to show this will provide more care at a lower cost.
And Brian, as we wrap up our questions, I'll leave you with this final one. What do you believe most distinguishes you from your opponents in this race?
I have spent my entire life working in, I was originally a minister in inner city churches and working in homeless shelters, community-based mental health, and have studied economics, partly focused on community development in orders. I think it's really clear where my heart is. Like, I care about people. I want a functioning society where we can all participate. And I'm not doing this because I'm motivated by like, oh, I want to get lots of wealthy, powerful friends to help me scratch my back. And then I think I am the most like hopeful and optimistic about solving the problems, like rather than just like the same partisan nonsense we've been hearing for decades about like, and I'm not mad, it works, like to fearmonger, it works to do the stuff, but they're both just pointing fingers. And so I think I'm willing to work with anybody, and I want to address the like real root issues that average Americans are facing. And so that's what I'm about, that's what I care about, and yeah.
Well, Brian, as we bring this to a close, I wanted to give you a couple of minutes to make any sort of closing remarks you want to make, and you know, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so one of the things I think I don't want us to give up on hope that we can learn how to talk to each other, because again, there are so many things that divide us, but and over time, as I was researching more like systemic solutions, I came to identify more with this. I've called myself a Republican socialist because it's like I realized a lot of the values came from my Republican parents, and so I think we can design a new generation of policy like the locally administered job guarantee that instead of that deals with some of the systemic problems we have with systemic solutions, but it's ones that support local decision making and put like the federal funds in the hands of local community members to support a thriving local economy, rather than to centralize, to define people by their deficits and what's wrong with them, give them handouts that don't fix any of the underlying problems in the economy, but instead gives communities the power to build a better future. And so I think there are ways we can like find root values we share and build towards that. And I hope that we will see more of that and not just more of this sort of fruitless partisan divide.
Well, Brian, I want to thank you for spending some time with us today. I know you've got a busy schedule trying to make the rounds and visit with voters, and so we really do appreciate your time. I just want to remind everybody who is watching that there's more information about the candidates on votejoco.com, and advanced voting by mail begins on Wednesday, July 15th. Advanced voting in person begins on Monday, July 20th. And of course, primary election day, Tuesday, August 4th, the polls will be open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So we encourage everyone to get out to vote. And thank you all very much.
Thanks.